Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of KuTube. Today we're going to be exploring a little bit about how to multiply and divide decimals. So before we begin today, please make sure you have the following materials out. You're going to need a copy of today's notes. If you have it readily available, please take that out. You can also print it if you have access to a printer. If not, please take out a blank piece of loose leaf paper, preferably graph paper. I think that will kind of help you line up some of the place values today, and title it with today's date and the title of the lesson, which is multiplying and dividing decimals. In addition, you will definitely need a pencil and an eraser, and you might want to have a calculator out. We're not really going to be using calculators often, but this is a nice way if you would like to have a calculator out to use it just to check your answers. We're really going to be looking at how to multiply and divide today, so I don't want you to be leaning too much on the calculators, but it's always a nice way to check your answers. All right, let's get started. So, before we begin today, let's go over last night's homework on adding and subtracting decimals. We did a lot of work on how to add and subtract decimals, specifically when we're dealing with positives and negatives. So for number 1 and number 2, we should have written the numbers in standard form. Put a check next to each problem if you got it correct, mark it wrong, and write the correct answer on the side if you got it incorrect. So the first problem there, we have 325 and 67 hundredths, which is what it obviously says there, but if I were to read out the answer, we have 325.67. For number 2, you have 17.005. All right, for number 3, obviously the answer here is negative 15 and 5 hundredths. However, I do want to look to see that you have the following steps. If you do not have this plan step added in, please add that in. It is really important that you're telling me, the reader, what operation, which in this case addition, and is your answer positive or negative. Now I know the plan step is time consuming, but it gives me a sense of what's going on in your brain. When you tell me it's addition, and then I notice here on the side here on your work that you've added, great. And you've told me here it's negative, that gives me an opportunity to give any partial credit in the case that let's say you just forgot a negative in your final answer. So as we go through each of these problems, please make sure that you're checking that you have each of these 3 components. Do you have your your plan step? Do you have your work shown? And do you have your final answer circled? Okay, so those 3 things that we're looking for. In number 4, you should have subtracted. Your answer should have been negative, and you have negative 9 and 26 hundredths. For number 5, you should have subtracted. Your answer should have been positive, and your final answer is 15 and 72 hundredths. And for number 6, you should have added, and your answer should have been negative, and your answer should have been negative 16. If you had any additional zeros, so for instance, if you had negative 16.00, keep in mind those are equivalent, all right? So either of those answers would work. All right, we're going to move to the next page. Numbers 7 through 11 are all here. I'm going to give you an opportunity to check these on your own, making sure that you are adding in each of these plan steps in your work. Otherwise, you can pause the video, check your final answers, and then unpause the video when you're ready to move on. All right, everyone, so hopefully you checked over your homework, you made any corrections, and I'm hopeful that you feel confident with adding and subtracting with positive and negative decimals. Today, we're really going to continue our work with decimal operations, focusing specifically on how to multiply and divide. When we did this in school last week, when we looked at just positives, a lot of you guys had said that you needed a refresher with multiplying and dividing. So we are going to refresh multiplying and dividing, but in addition to it, we are going to extend our previous knowledge of solving with positives and negatives. So before we begin, let's review. We did a lot of work with integers. We talked about how to multiply and divide integers. So we see 4 problems here on the board, and I want to just quickly ask you, is my answer going to be positive or negative? So for the first problem here, 6 times negative 3, and we know we're multiplying because of the parentheses, good. All right, 6 times negative 3, we get a final answer of, good, negative 18. All right, as I highlight each problem, I want to see if you can answer it out in your head. Negative 8 times negative 4, what does that give you? Good, positive 32. Let's go to the next one. Negative 5 times negative 3 times negative 10, a little trickier. Good, we get negative 150. Hopefully in your head, you're ignoring all the negatives. You're doing 5 times 3, which is 15, and then 15 times 10 gives you 150. Since there are an odd number of negatives in the problem, my answer is negative. Finally, our last question, negative 10 divided by negative 2. What's my final answer there? Good, positive 5. All right, I should have circled all my answers here, so I apologize. So let's refresh our memory. What's our rule? Remember, if we have an even number of negatives in the problem, our answer is positive. If there's an odd number of negatives, our answer is negative. So what's nice about multiplying and dividing is we really do those operations just as they're shown. If the problem says multiplying, multiply it out. If it's division, divide it out. But the only thing we have to keep in mind is counting the number of negatives. If there's an even number of negatives, I will result in a positive answer. If there's an odd number of negatives, I result in a negative answer. Now this rule right here is going to come into play a lot today. If you know this by heart at this point, you do not need to write this down. However, if this is something that you're like, I don't remember, you might want to pause the video and actually write this on the top of your notes in a box or maybe with stars, because this is going to be the rule whenever we are multiplying and dividing with positive and negatives. All right, let's get to our first example. The first thing I want to review is really how to multiply decimals. All right, and I have a fun little meme here, if you want to call it a meme or a GIF, I don't know what it's called. But when multiplying decimals, you don't line up the decimals, all right? Which some of us might find this very surprising. But please keep in mind that when we multiply decimals, so for example, 4/10 times 67/100, notice that we are not lining up our decimal points. Instead, we are lining up our last place value, all right? So let's kind of go through each of the steps. First and foremost, align the last digits on the right-hand side. You always should put the number with more digits on top, okay? So notice that it's not about what's larger. We're really going to put the one that has more digits on top. So let's try one out together. So we have -3 1/10 times 124. Take a moment and write that down in your notes as our first try it out example. So the first thing I want to do, just like we did when we added and subtracted, is to use what we know about estimation. So after I write down this problem, I'm going to estimate. I'm going to show the reader that I'm estimating by putting that squiggly equal sign. This indicates about equal to. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to round. -3 1/10, that rounds to about -3. 124, now we can round that to a lot of different things. I can say 100, I'm going to go with 120. And the reason I did 120 because it is very close to 124, and I feel very comfortable multiplying by anything that ends in a 0. So this should be about equal to -360. So going into the problem, I know my answer should be somewhere around -360. Now we're going to actually do a plan step. I'm going to ask myself, and I'm going to actually do this in red because this is all necessary steps. I'm going to first ask myself, what operation are we doing? Are we adding, subtracting, multiplying, and I'm just abbreviating each of these, or dividing. Good, we're multiplying, so I'm going to write mult, just going to abbreviate it, and should my answer be positive or negative? Good, it should be negative. There's one negative in the whole problem, that's an odd amount, so my answer should be negative. All right, I'm going to circle this plan step, and now I'm going to solve all of this out. I'm going to change my color to purple. I'm going to avoid the fact that it's negative. I'm going to put a negative here on the answer so I just know that my final answer, I don't forget that. Now, I always put the one with the larger number of digits on top. It doesn't matter that 124 is bigger. It's really about what has more digits times 3.1. So unlike addition and subtraction, I don't care about that decimal. All right, from here, what we're pretending in our brain here, and I'm gonna actually put this in like a little weird brain, is we're pretending that that decimal doesn't exist. In other words, we're multiplying by 10, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is to pretend that we're doing just a simple multiplication problem, multiplying by 31, and we're pretending that we multiply that second term by 10. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply each of these by 1. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Now we're going to the next line. I'm going to put a 0 to hold this 1's place. And now I'm going to look at the 3. 3 times 4 is 12. I'm going to put the 2 here, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus that 1 is 7. 3 times 1 is 3. Now we're going to add both of those up. 4, 7 plus 1 is 8. Bring down my 3. And I'm not done, right? We have a final answer of 3,844, but we know that's not right because we need to compensate. Since I multiplied by 10 originally, I now need to divide by 10, right, to reverse that process. So to divide by 10, I move the decimal place once to the left. So I'm left with the answer of 384 and 4/10. And what's nice is I put that negative right when I did my plan step, so I don't need to think twice about it. I'm going to circle my answer. I'm now going to look back at my check, and I'm going to see, okay, that is close to my work. So I'm going to clean up some of this extra work that I didn't need here, and that's my final work. All right, so notice a lot of the steps that I put on here. We've estimated. We've shown a plan step. I've shown my computations, and I've circled my final solution. Everything that's here listed that I've just highlighted in yellow are necessary steps when we multiply and divide. All right, let's try one more example out. I have some helpful steps on the side. Go ahead and write this problem out on your notes, and let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is to estimate. All right, so I'm going to round this first one to about, I'm going to read the problem first, right? -3 and 1/10 times 2 and 74/100. This is equivalent to saying -3 times 2 and 74/100. That's about 3. So we're looking at an answer somewhere around -9. Okay? Keep me in mind there's one negative, so my answer is going to be negative. All right, now I'm going to create a plan step. What operation is going on? Right? An operation is a positive or negative. In this case, we're multiplying. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? Good, it's going to be negative. I'm going to circle that plan step. All right, so after we create a plan step, let's start multiplying these. So remember, we always put the one with the larger number of digits on top. So in this case, 2 and 74/100 should go on top because it has 3 digits compared to 3 and 1/10. Remember, when multiplying, we do not line up that decimal point. All right, so once again, if you need to, just really thinking about this in terms of no decimals. So in my brain, I'm really thinking that I'm multiplying this by 100 to make this 274. And over here, I'm multiplying this by 10 to make it 31. All right, and then we're just going back to normal multiplication. So I'm going to do this out on the original problem. Let's start with the 1. 1 times 4 gives me 4. 1 times 7 gives me 7. 1 times 2 gives me 2. All right, from there, we're going to put a 0 in the 1's place, and we're going to go ahead and do that same thing with the 3. 3 times 4 is 12, carry the 1. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 is 22, carry that 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. Really being careful as much as you can to line up each of these place values, okay? Notice all of these place values are nice and lined up. That's where the graph paper really might come into play. All right, now let's go ahead and add all these up. 4 plus 0 is 4. I'm going to turn back to purple. That was my original problem color. 4 plus 0 is 4. 7 plus 2 is 9. 2 plus 2 gives me that 4. And then bring down that 8. All right, now we know our answer. It cannot be 8,494, right? I look at my estimation. Clearly, that's way off. So we need to compensate. Since we moved 2 place values to the right here and moved 1 place value to the right here, in total, now we need to compensate for that and move 3 place values to the left, or in other words, divide by 1,000. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 place values. I cannot leave my answer like that. So I'm going to write 8 and 494 thousandths, making my decimal point nice and clear. I'm going to go back to my plan step. Don't forget it's negative. Circle that final answer. I'm going to compare it with my estimation, and I know that I am correct. So let's clean up all this work that I do not need. All right, and this is the bare minimum of expectations for work. I'm once again looking for that estimation. I'm looking for that plan step. I'm looking for all that computation work and a final answer circled. All right, hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable with multiplying decimals. Remember, you can rewind and watch those 2 examples again. Otherwise, go ahead and pause the video and try B and C by yourself, showing all of those steps. Remember, I'm looking for a plan step. I'm looking for clear work. I'm looking for a circled solution. Once you're ready, unpause the video and I'll reveal the answers. All right, at this time, hopefully you have multiplied both B and C. So let's do some TV magic. Let's look at the answers. For example, B, we should have had the answer of -47 and 966 thousandths. For example, C, you should have had 612 thousandths. Now, just to give you guys a heads up, if you just had your answer as 0.612, that is equivalent but I will encourage you to put that 0 in that ones place, just because a lot of times, especially when we're writing with pencil, that decimal point can kind of get lost, especially if you write it really lightly. So putting that 0 in the front reminds me, which is the reader, to look for that decimal point. All right, hopefully you did nice and well for multiplying. Let's move on to division. Now, division, I'm not going to lie, is very time consuming. All right. It is very important that we line up each place values when we divide. So this is really where, if you do have graph paper or you have access to graph paper, please grab some out, because those little grids will really help you to line up some of the decimal points. Let's talk about some rules of division with decimals. The dividend goes inside the division symbol. So one of the most common questions I get is students won't remember which number goes, quote, inside the house or inside the division symbol. All right. The first number is always called my dividend, and it's divided by my divisor. If you need to write that down, you can. Like if you said 8 divided by 4, 8 is your dividend, 4 is your divisor. So I put the 7 and 224 thousandths inside the division symbol, and then my divisor goes outside. Now that we've set up the problem, just like multiplication, we don't want to deal with decimals. So I'm going to ask myself, how can I turn the number on the outside, or in other words, the divisor, a whole number? Well, to make 8 hundredths a whole number, I'm going to multiply it by 100. I'm going to move that decimal place 2 places to the right. So notice I moved it 2 places to the right, but remember, we can't just magically turn this into a whole number. So I have to move the dividend 2 places to the right as well. Once we do that, bring up your decimal and then divide normally. All right, that is a lot of steps. So let's actually try out 2 examples together before you try some out on your own. So let's look here. 3 and 66 hundredths divided by 1 and 2 tenths. All right, so dividing's a little tricky with estimating, but we're going to try this out here. I'm going to say this is about equal to saying 4 divided by, and we can say 1, I'm going to say 2, okay? Remember, our estimation doesn't need to be perfect, but we want to get a good ballpark range here. So this gives me about 2. So we know our answer should be 2. Around 2, sorry. So now I'm going to look here and I'm going to think about my plan step. Well, we're clearly dividing, and since there's no negatives in the problem, I'm dividing a positive by a positive, my answer should be positive. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that first number, 3 and 66 hundredths, and I'm going to put that inside my division sign. All right, I'm going to put 3 and 66 hundredths inside my division sign, and the 1 and 2 tenths on the outside. Now, once again, the number on the outside, I'm going to highlight here in green, cannot be a decimal. So I have to ask myself, how can I turn 1 and 2 tenths into a whole number? Good, I need to multiply by 10. I need to move that decimal place once to the right. So I'm multiplying by 10. So if I do that, I have to do that to number inside too. So now I've created this new problem. I've created 36.6 divided by 12. I personally like to rewrite it. That is optional though. All right, once you've got your new problem, we're going to bring up the decimal point and then we're going to divide normally. I'm going to look at this 12 and I'm going to ask, does it go into 3? 12 does not go into 3. So now I'm going to look, does 12 go into 36? Yes. Ask yourself, how many times does 12 go into 36? Good, 3 times. We're left with 36. I'm going to subtract those 2 numbers. That gives me 0. So I have to bring down this 6. Now I'm going to look here, and I'm going to use a different color just so hopefully this doesn't confuse you. I'm looking at this 12, and I'm asking you, how many times does 12 go into 6? It can't. 0. So 12 times 0 is 0. I'm going to bring this down. I need to bring down another place value. In this case, a 0. So now I'm going to ask myself, all right, how many times does 12 go into 60, which some of you might know. So for those of you that don't know this, using some number sense is really important. I'm saying 12 times what number gives me 60? Well, I know on the side here that I'm looking for 2 times something, right? In this case, I'm going to put a little question mark. It needs to give me a 0 in the ones place. Well, 2 times 0 gives me a 0 in the ones place, but clearly 12 times 0 doesn't give me 60. So the next number I'm going to really try is 5. And we're right, 12 times 5 does give us 60. So I'm going to go here, 12 times 5 gives me 60. That gives me a remainder of 0. Now my final answer is 3 5/100. I'm going to check that against my estimation. It's off, but it works. I'm going to check that I did not forget a sign. My answer should be positive, so I know we're good to go. All right, let's try another division problem. We have 35 64/100 divided by 1.1. I'm going to start by doing a little bit of an estimation. This is like saying negative 36 divided by 1. That's going to give me negative 36. All right, we're going to do a plan step. We're clearly dividing. Should my answer be positive or negative? Good, negative. All right, and then I'm going to start setting up my problem here. So we're going to put that dividend inside the division symbol. So 35 64/100. Notice I'm ignoring that negative sign. I already know in my plan step. Let's actually put a negative somewhere by my answer so I know that I don't forget that. Divided by 1.1. Remember, this number on the outside can never be a decimal, so we have to rethink about how we're going to write this problem. How can I turn that 1.1 into a whole number? Good. Move it over once. I multiply by 10, which means I need to multiply by 10 here. So now I have 356.4 divided by 11. Once you have the problem rewritten out, always bring up that decimal point, and then let's go through and solve this out. We're going to look at this 11. Does 11 go into 3? No. How many times does 11 go into 35? 3 times. Subtract that. 5 minus 3 is 2. I bring down my 6. Using those arrows, if you don't have a graph paper, use those arrows to keep those place values in check. Now I'm going to look at 11, and how many times does that go into 26? Good, 2 times. I'm going to follow my trail going up above the 6, up here. 11 times 2 gives me 22. So I'm going to subtract that. That gives me 6 minus 2 is 4. I'm going to bring down my next place value. This negative is currently in my way, so I'm going to erase it, but I'm going to put my negative somewhere where I want my answer to be. The next thing I'm going to do is ask myself how many times does 11 go into 44, and that's 4 times, tracing that place value back up. So we have minus 44, and we have a remainder of 0. So now my final answer of 32.4, but I'm not quite done yet. Don't forget your answer needs to be negative. So we've got negative 32.4. I'm going to circle that final answer. I'm going to cross-check it with my estimation, and we are good to go. All right. So anytime we're dividing, it's a little bit lengthier. It takes a lot of practice. Always lean on your estimation strategies. Always start with that plan step, and then really, really taking your time with your place values. All right, so take a look at letter E and letter F. You're going to try each of these problems out. The estimation for both of these are a little bit trickier. So think back to our decimal maze and think about what happens when you divide by a number between 0 and 1. Does it get smaller or does it get larger? All right, so if the estimation doesn't work, then head straight into the plan step and then your clear work and a circled solution. So go ahead, try example E and F out, and when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll go over those together. All right, so hopefully you've tried E and F. Let's take a look at our answers. For example, E, we're dividing and our answer should have been negative, looking at that plan step. My final answer should have been negative 6 25/100. For example, F, you should be dividing. Your answer should have been positive because there's 2 negatives in the original problem, and your final answer should have been 65 2/10. Remember, these are very, very specific skills, but we will be using these a little bit later when we start getting into more equation works, especially with equations with decimals and equations with rational numbers in general. The number one place that we use decimals is really dealing with monetary values. So understanding how to do operations with decimals is really important because precision matters, right? It's the difference between having $65.20 versus $652. That decimal point plays a huge role. So you guys can move on to tonight's homework. Tonight you have a decimal operations worksheet. please make sure that you are applying those plan steps. Now, as I zoom in on the first page of the homework, you're going to notice there's mixed operations. Some of the problems require you to add or subtract. Some of the problems require you to multiply or divide. So as you guys are completing this, make a plan step. I should see us looking like this for number 1. You should math tab. You should notice that this is going to be an adding problem. Your answer should be positive. After you create that plan step, then go ahead and solve it out, circle your final solution, then move on to the next problem. I'm looking for a plan step. I'm looking for computations shown clearly, and I'm looking for a circled solution. If you do add that estimation step, that is a wonderful tool to avoid errors. Okay, so go ahead and try your homework out, numbers 1 through 14. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. I hope this video helped you to really clarify how to multiply and divide, especially with positive and negatives. Hope that helped. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.